Barely a day had passed since my son's funeral when my daughter-in-law evicted me, then laughed when the will was read, utterly unaware of what was truly coming next. If you're watching, please subscribe and tell me your location. And if you appreciate compelling tales of justice, hit that like button. Let me share how this entire ordeal began, because sometimes the best retribution is simply allowing others to fully reveal their true nature. The phone rang at precisely 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. David's voice on the other end was strained, almost breathless. "Mom, something's wrong." My chest. "I can't." The connection abruptly died. By the time I arrived at the hospital, my beloved 4 or 5-year-old son was gone. "A massive cardiac arrest," the doctor stated with clinical detachment. There was absolutely nothing to be done. Stephanie stood beside me in the sterile waiting area, her face a rigid expression of shock. Yet, I perceived something else in her gaze. Relief? No. Surely my profound grief was playing cruel tricks on my mind. "What happens now?" I whispered, still utterly unable to grasp that David, my healthy, vibrant son, was simply no longer here. Stephanie straightened her shoulders, and for a fleeting instant, her composure completely faltered. "Now we deal with stark reality, Eleanor. David is gone, and I have important decisions to make." The sheer coldness in her tone sent a distinct shiver through me. Stephanie and I had never been close, but David had always been the vital bridge between us. Now that bridge was irrevocably gone, and I was beginning to truly comprehend the immense depth of the chasm that separated us. "Of course, dear, we'll get through this together," I offered, reaching for her hand. She recoiled sharply. "We'll see about that." I really should have recognized the stark warning in those chilling words. Instead, I attributed her frigidity to the overwhelming shock. People grieve in profoundly different ways, I told myself. Some become overtly emotional, others turn inward deeply. Stephanie was clearly the latter. The next 3 days were wholly consumed by the intricate funeral arrangements. I offered to help pay for everything. David had been my only cherished child after all. But Stephanie insisted on handling every single detail herself. "I'm his wife," she kept repeating with firm conviction. "I know what he would have wanted." "Fair enough," I conceded silently. I concentrated on composing his heartfelt eulogy, calling distant relatives, and trying desperately to hold myself together. At 67, I'd buried my parents and my dear husband, but losing a child felt like a truly unparalleled torment. The night before the funeral, as I sat in what had been David's childhood bedroom in the house he'd shared with Stephanie, I found myself staring intently at the framed photographs on the dresser. David, graduating college, David and Stephanie's wedding, David holding his little nephew at Christmas last year. What I conspicuously didn't see were any photos of David and me from recent years. Stephanie had systematically removed them. I suddenly realized. When had that truly happened? A soft, unexpected knock interrupted my troubled thoughts. Stephanie stood in the doorway, no longer bothering to hide the calculating, shrewd look in her eyes. "We need to talk, Eleanor." The funeral itself was undeniably beautiful. I'll give Stephanie that much credit. The flower arrangements were elegant and tasteful. The music featured David's favorite hymns, and the reception afterward was perfectly orchestrated and executed. What wasn't beautiful was watching my daughter-in-law play the role of the grieving widow while making pointed, subtle comments about moving forward and embracing new chapters. I stood in the receiving line accepting heartfelt condolences from friends and family when I distinctly overheard Stephanie talking to her sister behind the elaborate flower arrangements. "The life insurance alone will adequately cover the mortgage for 2 full years," she was saying in a low, conspiratorial voice. "And without the significant extra expenses?" "Extra expenses? What exactly do you mean by extra expenses?" "What about Eleanor?" her sister cautiously asked. "Where will she possibly go?" Stephanie's laugh was sharp, brittle, and utterly devoid of warmth. "That's absolutely no longer my problem. She can figure it out herself, like the rest of us responsible adults." A deep, unsettling chill ran through my entire being. I'd been living with them for 2 years, ever since I'd sold my own cherished home to help with their substantial down payment. David had insisted it would be merely temporary, just until I found something smaller and more manageable for myself. Somehow, temporary had stretched into permanent residency, and I'd grown quite comfortable in the routine of helping with the house, cooking dinner, feeling genuinely useful. Apparently, I'd been incredibly naive. Eleanor. Stephanie suddenly appeared at my elbow, her public face firmly, almost rigidly, in place. Could you please help me in the kitchen? There are some pressing things we need to discuss privately. I followed her through the dense crowd of mourners, nodding politely at neighbors, and accepting final, comforting hugs from my sister, who was flying back to Phoenix in the morning. In the kitchen, Stephanie deliberately closed the door and turned to face me directly. I'm going to be completely direct, she said, her voice unnervingly calm and businesslike. This house is officially in David's name, which means it is legally mine now. I need ample time and personal space to process my overwhelming grief without any unwanted complications. Complications? I kept my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was pounding relentlessly. Your continued presence here, it's just not working anymore, Eleanor. I truly need my privacy. The words hit me like a physical blow, a harsh, unexpected impact. Stephanie, I understand you're deeply grieving, but surely we can. No. She held up a firm, unyielding hand. I've made my final decision. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to pack your personal things. That should be plenty of time. I stared at her intently, searching for any fleeting sign of the woman who'd once called me Mom, who'd hugged me warmly at Christmas dinners, who'd cried tears of joy when David proposed. That woman was utterly gone, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and completely unfamiliar. Where exactly do you expect me to go? Stephanie simply shrugged dismissively. You're a grown woman, Eleanor. You'll figure something out. The casual cruelty of her tone truly took my breath away. David would be absolutely horrified by this conversation. David's dead. The words came out flat, final, and chillingly indifferent, and the sooner you accept that stark reality, the better off we'll both undoubtedly be. I packed my entire life into 4 suitcases and 2 meager boxes. 67 years of memories and possessions reduced to what would fit in the trunk of my small car. As I folded my clothes and carefully wrapped my few remaining photographs, I kept waiting for Stephanie to come upstairs and offer an apology, to say she'd spoken rashly in her grief, and of course, I could stay until I found somewhere else suitable to go. She never came. Instead, at exactly 6 p.m., the next day, she appeared in my doorway with her arms defiantly crossed. Time's up, Eleanor. I zipped the last suitcase closed and looked around the room that had been my sanctuary for 2 precious years. The walls were now bare, starkly stripped of the few personal touches I'd been allowed to add. It looked like a mere guest room again, which I supposed it always had truly been. I'll need a few more minutes to get everything to the car, I said, my voice quiet. I'll help you. It wasn't an offer of assistance. It was a cold, firm statement. Stephanie wanted me gone, and she wanted to make absolutely sure it happened quickly and efficiently. We made 3 silent trips. As I loaded the final box into my car, I turned to say goodbye, perhaps to make one final, desperate appeal to whatever remained of her humanity. I know you're angry with me for some unknown reason, I said quietly. I wish I knew what I'd done wrong so I could possibly fix it. Stephanie's expression didn't soften in the slightest. You didn't do anything wrong, Eleanor. You just exist in my space, in my life, in my way. David felt sympathy for you, but I certainly don't. The brutal honesty was shocking, and somehow cleaner than the polite fiction we'd been painstakingly maintaining. I see, I murmured. I got into my car and rolled down the window. Will you at least tell me if there's going to be a formal reading of David's will? I assume he left something for me. Why would he ever leave you anything? Stephanie's voice was genuinely puzzled, almost incredulous. You're not his wife, and it's not like you ever contributed financially to our household. The irony was so sharp, so cutting. It actually made me briefly smile. The $40,000 I'd given them for the down payment might strongly disagree with that assessment. but clearly Stephanie had either conveniently forgotten or genuinely convinced herself it had been a generous gift. "Of course," I said, with a sigh. Silly of me to even assume such a thing. I drove away without looking back, heading toward the Hampton Inn on Route 9. It was the closest, most affordable hotel I could find, while I desperately figured out what came next in my life. In the rearview mirror, I watched Stephanie stand motionless in the driveway until my car finally disappeared around the distant corner. At the hotel, I checked in for a week and carried my heavy suitcases to a generic room that smelled distinctly like industrial cleaning products and shattered dreams. I sat on the polyester bedspread and stared blankly at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. Who was this woman looking back at me? A widow. Now tragically childless. Completely homeless. And apparently utterly worthless in the eyes of the only family she had left. But as I sat there in that sterile, impersonal room, something utterly unexpected began to stir deep in my chest. Not just despair, though that was undeniably present too. Something sharper. Something that felt almost like a rising anticipation. Stephanie thought she'd won completely. She thought she'd successfully discarded the inconvenient mother-in-law and claimed her rightful prize. What she didn't know, however, was that David had been a much better, far more prescient son than she'd ever given him credit for. 2 weeks into my temporary hotel stay, just as I was starting to seriously worry about my rapidly dwindling savings, the crucial call came from David's lawyer. "Mrs. Fairfield, this is James Morrison, from Morrison & Associates. I handled your son's legal affairs." "Yes, Mr. Morrison. I distinctly remember meeting you at David and Stephanie's house closing. I'm calling to inform you that the probate process is now complete, and there will be a formal reading of David's will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. in my office. Your personal presence is absolutely required." My presence was required. I sat up straighter, ignoring the way the cheap mattress springs loudly protested. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion." Stephanie seemed to think, "Mrs. Fairfield." "Mr. Morrison interrupted gently but firmly. "I can only tell you what David's will specifically states, and it explicitly names you as a beneficiary. I'll see you next Tuesday, at 2 p.m. After he hung up, I stared at my phone for a long, contemplative moment. David had left me something after all. Probably some small keepsake, maybe his father's old watch or the treasured photo albums from his childhood. Stephanie wouldn't be happy about it, but she'd simply have to live with whatever David had ultimately decided. I spent the entire weekend apartment hunting online, diligently looking at senior living communities and modest one-bedroom rentals that fit within my tight budget. My savings account could barely cover another week at the hotel, plus first month's rent and a security deposit. But I'd need to be incredibly careful with every penny. Social Security and the small pension from my teaching career would have to stretch far further than I'd originally planned. At 1:45 p.m., the following Tuesday, I sat quietly in the parking lot of Morrison & Associates, watching Stephanie emerge from a sleek silver BMW, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my entire monthly budget. She'd brought someone with her, a distinguished man in an expensive suit who kept nervously checking his phone. When I walked into the reception area, Stephanie's face visibly darkened. "What is she doing here?" she demanded sharply of the professional receptionist. "Mrs. Fairfield is here for the will reading," the young woman replied calmly and professionally. "Which Mrs. Fairfield?" Stephanie's voice rose slightly, laced with disbelief. "Both of you, apparently." The man in the suit, who I now recognized as Stephanie's brother, Marcus, leaned over to whisper something urgent in her ear. She nodded curtly and took a seat far across the waiting room from me, making it abundantly clear that whatever temporary civility might have existed between us was officially and completely over. Mr. Morrison appeared promptly at 2 p.m. and ushered us all into his private office. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s with distinguished silver hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, truly the kind of lawyer who probably still deeply believed in doing right by his cherished clients. "Ladies, gentlemen," he began, settling comfortably behind his large mahogany desk. "I know this is a profoundly difficult time for everyone, but David was very precise about his final wishes. I'll read the will in its entirety, and then we can discuss any pressing questions." Stephanie sat forward eagerly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a picture of anticipation. Marcus had pulled out a legal pad and was meticulously preparing to take notes. I simply folded my own hands and waited patiently. The first part of the will was exactly what I'd expected, confirming all my suspicions. Stephanie inherited the house, the vehicles, David's retirement accounts, and his substantial life insurance policy. She nodded approvingly at each item, occasionally glancing at me with something that looked suspiciously like smug satisfaction. Then, Mr. Morrison's voice changed slightly, a subtle shift, and I knew we were approaching something truly important, something unexpected. There is, however, one final, crucial provision that David added just 3 months ago. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. Stephanie stopped nodding and leaned further forward, her eyes sharp with sudden, intense attention. Marcus silently sat down his pen, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat deliberately and continued reading. "To my beloved mother, Eleanor Fairfield, who generously provided the down payment for our shared home and has never once asked for repayment, I leave the entire contents of Safety Deposit Box E3 through D7 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and detailed account information contained therein." "What safety deposit box?" Stephanie's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. David never once mentioned a safety deposit box. Mr. Morrison looked up from the document, his expression mild. Apparently, it was something he maintained quite privately. He was remarkably specific that its contents should go directly to his mother. I was as utterly surprised as Stephanie, but for entirely different reasons. David had never mentioned a safety deposit box to me either, not once. What could he possibly have put in there that was specifically meant for me? "What's actually in it?" Marcus asked, his sharp lawyer instincts immediately kicking in. "I have no idea whatsoever, Mr. Morrison replied honestly, with a slight shrug. David simply provided the bank information and clear instructions that Mrs. Fairfield should have full, unrestricted access upon his death. Stephanie's face was now flushed bright red with unconcealed anger. "This is absolutely ridiculous. If there's anything of actual value in that box, it should be part of the estate. We need to contest this immediately." "You're certainly free to try that, of course, Mr. Morrison said mildly, his tone even. "But the provision is very clear, and David was completely competent and of sound mind when he added it to his will. I personally witnessed the document myself." "When exactly did he add this provision?" I asked quietly, my curiosity piqued. Mr. Morrison consulted his detailed notes. 3 months ago, February 15th. He came in specifically to make this important amendment. February 15th. I remembered that exact date clearly because it was the day after Valentine's Day, and David had seemed unusually quiet and pensive during our family dinner. Stephanie had been complaining incessantly about something trivial. The neighbor's noisy dog, I think. And David had barely spoken a word throughout the entire meal. "This is a complete waste of our precious time," Stephanie snapped, standing abruptly with a harsh scrape of her chair. "Marcus, let's go. We'll file a formal challenge tomorrow morning." "Actually," Mr. Morrison said, pulling out yet another document with a flourish, "before you both leave, I need to inform you that David left very specific instructions for his mother regarding the contents of the safety deposit box. Mrs. Fairfield, he wanted you to access it within the next few days once you've completed the necessary documentation with the bank." He handed me a sealed envelope. "These are the crucial bank documents and his personal key. The bank will need to verify the death certificate and thoroughly process the paperwork before you can access the box. It usually takes about 3 business days." Stephanie's eyes fixed on the envelope in my trembling hands like a hungry hawk watching its unsuspecting prey. "I'm coming with you to the bank." "I'm afraid that's simply not possible," Mr. Morrison interjected smoothly. "The safety deposit box access is strictly restricted to Mrs. Eleanor Fairfield only. It's bank policy." "This is utterly insane," Stephanie sputtered, her voice rising. "How do we even know there's anything valuable in there? It could be entirely empty," Or just filled with worthless sentimental junk? I stood up, clutching the envelope tightly. I suppose we'll find out for ourselves next week, won't we? As we filed out of the office, I could still feel Stephanie's intense eyes boring into my back, a palpable pressure. In the parking lot, she aggressively cornered me beside my car. Eleanor, let's please be reasonable about this whole unfortunate situation. Whatever's in that box, we should absolutely share it. David would have wanted his devoted wife to benefit from anything he left behind. Surely, for the very first time since David's death, I almost managed a small, ironic smile. You made it very clear earlier that you didn't believe David would have left me anything at all. Now suddenly you're deeply concerned about sharing? I'm just saying. You're saying whatever you think will get you immediate access to that safety deposit box. I unlocked my car door, my movements deliberate. But David was very specific in his instructions. The contents are entirely mine. Her mask slipped completely then, revealing the raw, cold calculation beneath. Don't forget, Eleanor, you're currently homeless. You truly need my goodwill far more than I need yours. I paused with my hand on the car door, meeting her gaze squarely. Actually, Stephanie, I honestly don't think I need anything from you at all. 3 business days later, after diligently providing the death certificate and completing all the bank's tedious paperwork, I finally stood before Safety Deposit Box 3537 at First National Bank. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, was already expecting me. She'd obviously been thoroughly briefed about the entire situation because she offered her sincere condolences and escorted me personally to the secure vault area. Box 337 is one of our much larger units, she explained kindly as we walked through the heavy security doors. Your son rented it about 5 years ago and visited quite regularly, almost habitually. 5 years? David had been meticulously planning something for 5 long years. Mrs. Peterson used her master key while I carefully inserted David's key, and the heavy box slid out smoothly and silently. It was indeed large, approximately the size of a standard briefcase, and surprisingly heavy. Take all the time you need, Mrs. Peterson said gently, showing me to a private viewing room. I'll be at my desk when you're completely finished. Alone in the small, windowless room, I slowly lifted the lid of the safety deposit box. The very first thing I saw was a letter addressed directly to me in David's familiar, cherished handwriting. My hands trembled noticeably as I carefully opened it. Mom, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And Stephanie has probably revealed exactly who she truly is. Just as I suspected. I'm deeply sorry for that. But I'm honestly not surprised. I've known for years what kind of person I married, and I've been diligently preparing for this very possibility. My heart raced with a mixture of dread and anticipation as I continued reading. You generously gave us $40,000 for our house down payment. I know you thought of it as a loan, even though you never once asked for repayment. I've been wisely investing that money for the past 5 years, adding to it whenever humanly possible. The substantial funds in the accompanying accounts aren't just simple repayment, it's what careful, strategic investing has meticulously grown into. I set the letter down with shaking hands and looked at the numerous documents underneath. Bank statements, detailed investment portfolios, account numbers. My eyes scanned the balance sheets frantically, trying desperately to make sense of the overwhelming numbers. $185,000 in various investment accounts, all legally in my name, all fully accessible, with proper documentation. I picked up David's letter again, hardly believing the incredible words I was reading. I also discovered that Stephanie has been telling people, you contribute absolutely nothing to our household. What she conveniently doesn't mention is that our mortgage has been automatically paid directly from my salary account for the entire time you've lived with us. Any money you've given us went straight into careful investments for your future, the letter continued with stark clarity. I've been meticulously documenting everything. Mom. Every single email, every text, every casual, dismissive comment she's ever made about you. It's all meticulously organized in the folder labeled Documentation. I thought you should clearly know what kind of manipulative person has been living in our house alongside you. My vision blurred with emotion as I reached for the folder he'd mentioned. Inside were printed emails, countless text message screenshots, even photographs of credit card statements, overwhelming evidence of years of insidious manipulation and calculated deceit. The final, poignant paragraph of David's letter made my eyes fill with hot tears. "You truly deserve so much better than the way she's treated you. Take this money and build yourself a wonderful life where no one can ever make you feel unwanted or unvalued again. And Mom, please don't tell Stephanie about any of this until you're safely and completely away from her. Trust me implicitly on this one. All my love, David." I sat in that little room for nearly an entire hour, carefully reading through everything David had thoughtfully left for me. By the time I emerged, I had a crystal clear picture of exactly how my daughter-in-law had been manipulating both of us for many years. Mrs. Peterson kindly helped me transfer all the documents to a large, secure envelope and patiently explained the precise process for accessing the investment accounts. As I walked to my car, my phone rang unexpectedly. "Eleanor." Stephanie's voice was falsely sweet, dripping with artificial warmth. "I was wondering if you'd like to come by for a lovely lunch today. We could potentially discuss what you found in that safety deposit box." I smiled subtly at my reflection in the car window. "That's very generous, Stephanie. I'll be there promptly at noon." It was finally time for Stephanie to learn that sometimes the people you most underestimate are the very ones who surprise you the most profoundly. I arrived at Stephanie's house, her house now, as she so often reminded me at exactly noon, carrying a small, innocuous gift bag and wearing my very best poker face, utterly devoid of emotion. She answered the door in a flowing white designer dress that probably cost more than my entire monthly hotel bill. All fake smiles and false warmth. "Eleanor, I'm so genuinely glad you came. I've made your absolute favorite chicken salad." Funny how she suddenly remembered my preferred foods now that she desperately wanted something significant from me. The dining room table was meticulously set with her finest wedding china and fresh, fragrant flowers. Stephanie had clearly put a tremendous amount of effort into this elaborate performance. She poured iced tea and chattered incessantly about the weather while I sat quietly, observing her carefully work up to what she truly, deeply wanted to discuss. "So," she finally said, settling into her chair with practiced, artificial grace, "I've been thinking a great deal about yesterday, about the mysterious safety deposit box." "Have you?" I sipped my tea calmly, betraying nothing. "I know we've certainly had our differences, but David would surely want us to support each other through this incredibly difficult time. Family should always stick together. Don't you agree?" Family, I thought. What an incredibly rich sentiment coming from the woman who'd ruthlessly thrown me out the very day after her husband's funeral. "I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly," I said evenly, maintaining my composed facade. Stephanie's eyes lit up, clearly thinking she'd found an opportune opening. "I'm so genuinely relieved to hear you say that. I was worried you might be angry about having to find your own place so quickly, but you perfectly understand I needed space to grieve, don't you?" Of course, I took a deliberate bite of chicken salad. "Grief affects everyone profoundly differently." "Exactly." She leaned forward eagerly, almost salivating. "So, about what David left you, I was thinking we could perhaps pull our collective resources, combine whatever was in that box with David's life insurance, maybe even invest it all together. I happen to know some truly wonderful financial advisors." I bet she did, I thought wryly. The very same ones who'd been helping her make highly questionable spending decisions for years. "That's very thoughtful of you, Stephanie, but I'm curious. What specifically makes you think there was anything particularly valuable in the safety deposit box?" She paused, clearly not expecting such a direct question. "Well, David was always so incredibly private about certain financial matters. He must have had a very good reason for keeping something separate, mustn't he?" "Private? That's certainly an interesting choice of words, wouldn't you say?" "You know exactly what I mean." She waved a dismissive hand. "Men in their financial planning. They never tell us wives absolutely everything. Do they?" I set down my fork deliberately and looked directly at her with unwavering gaze. "Actually, Stephanie, I think David told you exactly as much as he thought you truly needed to know." Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty. Perhaps even a hint of genuine fear. What did you actually find in the box, Eleanor? The definitive moment of truth was rapidly approaching, but I wasn't quite ready to play that card just yet. Instead, I reached for the small gift bag I'd brought. I brought you something, I said, pulling out a small, neatly wrapped package. A little thank you gift, if you will. She unwrapped it eagerly, revealing a framed photograph of David from his college graduation. A moment of pure joy. Her face softened slightly. A rare, genuine expression. Oh, thank you so much. I thought you should have it, I replied smoothly. After all, you were such a devoted wife. The subtle emphasis I placed on the word devoted wasn't lost on her in the slightest. She looked up sharply, searching my face intently for any hidden meaning or insinuation. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all. Dear, I'm just appreciating how exceptionally well you took care of my son. Stephanie set the photograph down carefully, her entire demeanor shifting perceptibly. The fake sweetness was rapidly evaporating, replaced by something much wearier, much more guarded. Eleanor, you're being incredibly cryptic. Just tell me what was actually in the safety deposit box. I smiled faintly and took another slow sip of tea. What kind of documents, precisely? Oh, typical financial records, detailed investment statements, some personal correspondence. I paused meaningfully, letting the words sink in. Quite a few printed emails and text messages. As a matter of fact, the color completely drained from Stephanie's face, leaving it pale and drawn. Text messages? David was quite thorough and meticulous in his record-keeping, especially toward the very end. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos David had taken of various text conversations. Would you like to see one? This particular one is from about 6 months ago. I turned the screen toward her, showing a damning screenshot of her texting her sister. God. I can't wait until that old hag finally moves out. Then we can turn her room into the home gym I've been wanting for ages. Stephanie lunged desperately for my phone, but I pulled it back smoothly, just out of her reach. There are dozens more, you see, I said conversationally, my voice calm. David was apparently very, very good at documentation. This next one is particularly enlightening, I think. It's you texting Marcus about how you've been convincing David that I should contribute to household expenses when the mortgage was already meticulously budgeted and paid from his salary. Stop. Stephanie's voice was barely a strangled whisper, filled with dawning horror. And then there's this email where you're openly laughing with your sister about how gullible I am, how incredibly easy it was to make me feel like an utter burden when you'd already coldly planned to kick me out immediately after David's death. I set the phone down gently and looked at her with what I hoped was mild, detached curiosity. That was rather forward-thinking of you, by the way. Planning my eviction while David was still very much alive, Stephanie's composure finally cracked completely, utterly shattering. He had no right to save private messages. Actually, he had every right, Stephanie. It was his house, and you were discussing his mother. My dear, I leaned back comfortably in my chair, feeling a calm power. The real question is, what are we going to do about this rather complicated situation? What do you want from me? The mask was entirely off now, revealing the truly calculating, ruthless woman underneath. Want? I don't want anything from you, Stephanie. I never did. Not really. Then why are you doing this to me? What's the actual point of humiliating me so completely? I considered the question seriously, thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. There's no point in me humiliating you. You've done that perfectly well yourself, haven't you? I don't understand what you mean. You threw me out of my home the very day after my son's funeral. You told me I was utterly worthless, that David felt pity for me, that I'd contributed absolutely nothing to your household. I stood up slowly, deliberately, but here's what you fundamentally didn't understand about David. He saw everything, every cruel comment, every manipulation, every single lie you told. Stephanie was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles stark white against the wood. And you want to know the really beautiful part of this entire situation? I continued, my voice steady. He documented all of it. Not to hurt you, Stephanie, but to fiercely protect me. Because he knew that once he was gone, you'd reveal your true, ugly colors. You can't prove any of this would ever hold up in a court of law. Court? I laughed. A genuine, surprising sound that even caught me off guard. Oh, sweetie, I'm not taking you to court. Why would I bother? Stephanie blinked, clearly bewildered by my unexpected response. You're not? Why wouldn't you? What do you mean? Why would I? You've already given me everything I could possibly need, haven't you? I don't understand what you're talking about at all. I pulled out the substantial folder from David's safety deposit box and placed it firmly on the table between us. David left me more than just text screenshots. Stephanie, he left me 5 years' worth of irrefutable evidence showing exactly how you've been manipulating both of us for so long. She stared at the folder like it might suddenly bite her. Bank statements showing that the house payments have been automatically deducted from David's salary for the entire time I've been living here. Extensive email chains between you and Marcus discussing how to meticulously handle the Eleanor situation. Credit card statements clearly showing luxury purchases made on the very same days you told David we couldn't afford basic household items. Stephanie's breathing was becoming shallow, ragged. David saved all of that? Every single thing? David documented everything, including copies of the emails you sent to your closest friends, calling him a spineless pushover, and openly joking about how incredibly easy it was to manipulate him into thinking I was a financial burden. That hit home hard. Stephanie flinched visibly, as if I'd physically slapped her across the face. You want to know what I found most interesting and disturbing? I continued, opening the folder to a specific page. This email thread where you and Marcus meticulously discuss your long-term plans to have me officially declared mentally incompetent so you could legally access my pension and Social Security. That's not we never actually. No, you never actually followed through with it. Do you know why that is? Because David figured out exactly what you were planning and took decisive steps to protect me. Stephanie's eyes widened in genuine horror. What steps? You don't have anything worth protecting, do you? Don't I? I smiled pleasantly, a genuine, serene smile. That's interesting, because according to these detailed investment statements, I apparently have quite a bit worth protecting. Stephanie, money that David had been carefully and strategically growing for the past 5 years. That's absolutely impossible. You're living in a dismal hotel. I'm living in a hotel because I choose to be there while I calmly figure out my next move, not because I can't afford something infinitely better. The silence stretched uncomfortably between us as Stephanie processed this astonishing information. I could practically see the frantic wheels turning in her head, trying desperately to calculate how much money we might actually be talking about. How much? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Excuse me, how much money did David actually leave you? I closed the folder deliberately and stood up. That's really none of your business, is it, Stephanie? I'm his wife. I have every right to know. You had a right to know what your husband left you, which, as I recall, was quite generous indeed. The house, the cars, the life insurance, his retirement accounts. I'd say you made out very well, wouldn't you? Stephanie shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, a harsh, grating sound. You manipulative old witch! You're trying to brazenly steal what's rightfully mine. Steal? I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. How exactly would I be stealing anything at all? Everything I have was lovingly given to me by my son, who had every legal right to dispose of his personal assets as he saw fit, as is his right. He was my husband. Yes, he was. And apparently he knew exactly what kind of wife you truly were, Stephanie. The words hung heavily in the air like a stark, undeniable challenge. Stephanie's face was flushed crimson with anger and something that looked suspiciously like raw panic. I want to see those bank statements right now, she demanded, her voice trembling. I'm sure you do, Eleanor. I'm warning you, old woman. You're warning me? I laughed again, feeling an odd, profound liberation. Stephanie, honey, You threw me out of your house. You publicly humiliated me at my son's funeral. You made it abundantly clear that you consider me utterly worthless and completely unwanted. What exactly do you think you can possibly threaten me with now, my dear? Stephanie stared at me for a long, intense moment, and I could clearly see her recalibrating her strategy. The threats weren't working, so she was quickly switching tactics. Eleanor, please, let's be reasonable about this whole unfortunate situation. Her voice took on a pleading, desperate tone. I know I've been incredibly difficult since David died. I was deeply grieving, you see. I wasn't thinking clearly at all. But we're family, Eleanor. We should really work together, shouldn't we? Family, I repeated thoughtfully, savoring the word. Yes, you mentioned that before, didn't you? Right after you told me David felt sorry for me and that I'd never contributed anything of value to your household. I didn't mean that. I was just so upset. I said things I truly didn't mean. Oh, but you did mean them, Stephanie. That's precisely what makes David's meticulous documentation so incredibly valuable. He saved you saying the very same things multiple times to multiple people over a period of many years. Stephanie's mask slipped again, revealing her true self. What do you truly want from me, Eleanor? An apology? I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I asked you to leave my house. I'm sorry for everything. Absolutely everything. Now, can we please discuss this money situation like rational adults? There's absolutely nothing to discuss, Stephanie. Of course, there is. If David left you a truly significant amount of money, we urgently need to plan how to manage it responsibly. I know excellent financial advisors. I could genuinely help you invest it properly. You mean you could help me spend it properly, don't you? That's not what I said, she shrieked. It's what you absolutely meant, Stephanie. I picked up my purse, my resolve firm. Stephanie, let me be very clear about something profoundly important. The money David left me isn't some inheritance that simply fell into my lap by chance. It's the substantial return on the $40,000 I gave you for your house down payment, plus 5 years of careful, strategic investment. Her mouth fell open in utter shock. $40,000? You actually gave us that much. Did you truly think it was a mere gift? Did you think I just handed over my life savings out of the sheer goodness of my heart, with no expectation of any repayment whatsoever? David said it was a family contribution, a generous family contribution. David was trying to preserve your pride and mine, Stephanie, but he never, ever forgot it was a loan. I could see her mind racing frantically, trying to process this astounding new information. If I'd invested $40,000 5 years ago, and David had been diligently growing it? How much is it worth now, exactly? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I pulled out my phone and opened one of the banking apps the bank had kindly helped me set up. The impressive account balance filled the entire screen, and I deliberately turned it toward her, letting her see it clearly. $185,000. Stephanie's face went completely white, drained of all color. She grabbed the edge of the table to desperately steady herself. That's absolutely impossible. It can't be. David was a remarkably careful investor, and apparently he was very highly motivated to make absolutely sure his mother was well taken care of. Wouldn't you agree? But that's almost as much as the life insurance policy itself, she stammered. Yes, it is, Stephanie. And that money should be part of the estate. It should be split fairly between us. Should it, based on what specific legal principle, pray tell? Based on the undeniable fact that I'm his wife, and you're just his mother. The casual, dismissive cruelty in those final words, just his mother, hit me like a physical blow, a sharp, unexpected impact. But instead of pain, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. You know what, Stephanie? You're absolutely right. You truly are. I am just his mother. The woman who gave birth to him, raised him, supported him tirelessly through college, and even lent him the substantial down payment for the very house where you heartlessly threw me out like absolute garbage. I stood up and slung my purse over my shoulder with a sense of profound finality. And apparently, That was more than enough for David to make absolutely sure I'd never have to depend on anyone's charity ever again. "Wait!" Stephanie called out desperately as I headed purposefully toward the door. "Eleanor, wait! We can definitely work this out. Please. Just sit down. Let's talk about this rationally, calmly." I paused in the doorway and turned back to face her one last time. "What exactly do you think we need to work out, Stephanie? The money situation, our difficult relationship, everything, Eleanor, everything." She was speaking quickly now, her voice tight with rising panic. "Look, I know I made some terrible mistakes. I was terribly stressed about David's sudden death, genuinely worried about finances, and I took it all out on you. But we can absolutely fix this, I promise." "I'm sure you were worried about finances," I said quietly, my voice devoid of empathy. "But certainly not for the self-serving reasons you're now claiming." "What's that supposed to mean, Eleanor?" I pulled out one more damning document from David's folder, one I'd been carefully saving for this precise last moment. "It means David also meticulously documented your extravagant spending habits, Stephanie, including the astonishing $15,000 you charged to various credit cards in the single month before he tragically died." Her face went completely ashen, a sickly gray. "Spa treatments, expensive designer clothes, a lavish weekend in New York with your sister, all while telling David you were desperately worried about money for basic groceries. That's not I wasn't. You weren't what? Planning to live lavishly off his life insurance while cruelly throwing out the inconvenient mother-in-law who might potentially interfere with your extravagant lifestyle? Is that what you mean?" Stephanie collapsed back into her chair, the fight completely draining out of her, leaving her utterly defeated. "You don't understand the immense pressure I was under. Eleanor." "What pressure, Stephanie?" "Everyone expected me to be the perfect wife, the perfect hostess. David's esteemed colleagues, the nosy neighbors, my demanding family. Do you have any idea how utterly exhausting it is to constantly maintain such appearances?" I looked at her sitting there in her expensive designer dress, in her beautiful, luxurious house, surrounded by every comfort, complaining bitterly about the crushing burden of appearances. "No, Stephanie, I don't understand at all. Because I was too busy actually taking genuine care of your husband while you were busy spending his hard-earned money." "I loved David," she wailed. "You loved what David could provide for you, Stephanie. There's a profound difference, wouldn't you say?" She was crying now, ugly, unfeigned tears that smeared her perfect expensive makeup. "I can't lose everything. I can't go back to being nobody again." "You're not nobody, Stephanie. You're David's widow. You inherited a $500,000 house, a $200,000 life insurance policy, and his substantial retirement accounts. You're financially set for life if you simply manage it properly and responsibly. But it's simply not enough for the lavish life I carefully planned." "Then maybe you planned the wrong kind of life, Stephanie. A life built on deceit." I walked purposefully toward the door again, and this time, she didn't even try to stop me with words. Instead, there was a soft thud behind me. I turned to see Stephanie slumped forward in her chair, her face gray, her breathing shallow and ragged. For a fleeting moment, I actually thought she might be having a genuine medical emergency. Then I realized what I was truly seeing. Complete, utter defeat. The devastating moment when someone finally realizes they've lost everything they thought they were entitled to, and there's no manipulation or charm or cruelty left that can ever get it back. "I can't," she whispered brokenly. "I can't lose everything." "You're not losing everything, Stephanie. You're losing the things that never truly belonged to you in the very first place." I left her there in her expensive dining room, surrounded by her wedding china and her carefully constructed life of lies, and walked out into the bright sunshine of my new, liberating beginning. Sometimes the best retribution isn't retribution at all, but rather profound justice served exactly when it's needed most. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, it comes with a hefty bank balance and the profound knowledge that the child you raised turned out to be exactly the honorable man you hoped he'd become. David had taken care of me after all, just like he'd faithfully promised he always would. Even from beyond the grave, my beloved son had kept his sacred word, and that, more than any amount of money, was the single greatest gift he could have ever given me. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your own story in the comments below. Your unique voice truly matters.